What's up guys, my name is Marc Steiner, and today we're going to be talking about why I chose to buy the Sony A7S III over the Canon EOS R5, the Red Komodo, and maybe a couple other cameras. Let's get right into it. So first off, I want to preface this video saying that yes, I am a Sony shooter and I have been for almost 3 years now, but that did not sway me in my decision in whether or not to buy any one of these cameras on the market. I was in the market for a very niche camera. I wanted a dedicated video camera. I was looking at cinema level cameras. That's why we're talking about the Red Komodo. I wasn't being loyal to Sony only here because I have that brand loyalty. I wanted to fill a need that I had, and I was doing all my research to find what camera best fit that need. So now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the Canon EOS R5 and why I was considering it and then decided against it. So when the Canon EOS R5 was being rumored, I was like, this is way too good to be true. There's no way. This is Canon we're talking about. They always cripple their cameras. There's no way that they put out what they're saying that they're going to. And the rumors just keep getting better. And then spec after spec was confirmed. And I was like, you know what? This is looking like a pretty good camera. This is getting very interesting. 8K, I'm not going to use that, but the ability to do that would be interesting. 4K 120, Canon colors, like you're getting a lot of good stuff in this camera. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to start considering the Canon EOS R5. And if it's good enough for video, I might consider buying it for stills as well. Like this is a potential massive switch. And then because I was looking at the Canon EOS R5, I started thinking about the Red Komodo because this was, actually around the same price point. I think it starts at $6,000, so a little bit more expensive for sure. It's a cinema camera. And it had an RF mount, which means that you can use RF glass on that. But more interestingly, with the Red Komodo, is that even though it has an RF mount, it's not really being used for the RF mount right now. It's being used as an RF to EF adapter. And what really started getting me thinking about the Red Komodo was the fact that this RF to EF adapter now had the high quality built-in ND filters. And that was really interesting to see because at a camera at that price point, around $6,000, you don't really see built-in NDs happening at that price point. And then to have the red color science, red raw in this small compact camera with now variable NDs and Canon's lineup of lenses, as well as being able to adapt other lenses, it was looking like a really, really good option. So I was like, all right, yes, it's more expensive. Is this for me? And so I started doing the math and I'm like, all right, by the time I rig it out, by the time I get like the Sigma 18 to 35 1.8, because that's like a legendary lens and the go-to, my rig would be somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 just to get this working. And I'm not saying that you need to spend that much money on a cinema camera to get it rigged out. The Red Komodo is really interesting in that regard because it's the first red camera that is unlike any other red camera. It doesn't have all this very specific ecosystem related stuff. Like you can use any monitor, like people were using the small HD monitor. You can use RF glass, which is awesome. You had the built-in ND filter with the EF to RF adapter, and then you didn't have to use red mags. You could use the CFast cards, which is insane that Red, a company known for making you buy their own products and getting you in that ecosystem and making you spend a fortune on just being able to run your camera. Because even though the bodies are like $50,000 to $100,000, you needed to spend, $50,000 to another $100,000 just to get it up and running because you were only paying for the brain, not anything else. So the fact that the Red Komodo, all you really needed to run it was a battery and a lens, and that was about it, was revolutionary. So this is what got me really interested. And then I started hearing about the fact that it had autofocus, and I was like, autofocus in a red camera, in a cinema camera at that price point? I was getting really interested in this camera. And what happened is that, this autofocus is nowhere near anything that we're accustomed to in the autofocus realm. It's a contrast-based autofocus system, so it's very poor. It's not for tracking or anything. It's more or less getting your thing in focus and then putting it to manual focus so it doesn't move in between. It's a very rudimentary focus system. I'm sure that it'll get better over time, but because it's a contrast-based autofocus system, I don't see vast improvement happening compared to, like the Canon EOS R5 and the Sony A7S III with their hybrid autofocus system, because that's contrast is just not it in this day and age if you want usable, reliable, awesome autofocus. So that's something I care about. Autofocus is really big to me in a camera because I like having these standing shots where I can just point the camera at me and know I'm in focus. I'm not doing manual focus when I'm out running and gunning. I just want to know that things are in focus and I can rely on the autofocus. So even though I was interested in this cinema camera, I knew that already because of the price point and how I would have to shoot with this camera. It wouldn't be like my everyday vlog camera, throw it in my bag, go traveling with it. It would be for very specific client use or maybe talking head YouTube videos, like higher end work. And I was like, I'm at a point in my career, I'm thinking about this kind of camera. Do I need this? And I'm like, I'm traveling a lot. I'm doing a lot of on the go stuff. I don't know if this camera suits me right now at this point in my career. Maybe down the line, and by then they might have like a Red Komodo 2 that has better autofocus. But I think right now it's not really what I needed. So that kind of like got written off. I was intrigued, but I was like, all right, this is a later on in life purchase. This isn't a right now purchase. So that brought me back to the Canon EOS R5. And I was like, all right, these rumors are looking really, really good. Let's see what Canon comes out with. And then because I was looking at the Red Komodo, I was also starting to look at the Sony FX9. And I was really intrigued by this camera, but again, the price point, I was like, first off, this is a much bigger camera. It has a lot of stuff. This is definitely not a run and gun vlog camera that I can just throw in my bag. This is heavy duty. And I already get yelled at enough when I'm roaming around like, hey, do you have a permit here? Do you have this? With the tiny vlog cameras that I have, my Sony A7SIII and now the R3 that I've been using for the past couple of years, people are always like, oh, that's a professional camera, you can't be here. And I hate having to deal with that. And then having a full-on cinema camera, that's only going to make it even worse. And obviously you're not going to be able to shoot in certain areas like that. So even though I was intrigued by the FX9 and what it had to offer and the awesome electronic variable ND, I was so excited for that. I was really hoping that feature would make it to the S3 because I was so hyped about it. It didn't, and I was a bit bummed about that, but it is what it is. The FX9, again, was intriguing, maybe a later on in life purchase, but right now, not the play for me. So that really stuck me between the A7S III and the Canon EOS R5. And when you're spending that much money on a camera, you want to know that you're getting the best possible thing for you. And I was like, all right, RF glass is pretty expensive. Like the good glass right now, all their premium glass is over $3,000. There's not really anything below that I would deem a good lens. Like sure, there's the 35 and I think there's an 85 f2 now. At the time there wasn't, they hadn't announced it yet. But those lenses for me weren't the highest quality. I'm more intrigued in the 85 f2, but that's not really an all-round lens that I can use for all video purposes. And yes, I could adapt. I could do the same thing I was going to do with the Red Komodo, but if I was going to get the Canon EOS R5, I wanted at least one good lens to do that, and I wasn't really willing to spend $3,000+ on a lens for something that I wasn't 100% sure about at this point. So that was something to think about, but I was like, I could just adapt EF glass. I could get some secondhand market EF glass and be fine. I'd be like, all right, this is a possibility. And so they finally released the Canon EOS R5. And I was like, all right, I'm going to watch every single review ever made, see the biased and unbiased reviews, see the people excited about it, see the people trashing on it, and give it a very fair judgment of whether or not I spend my hard-earned money on it. And initially it looked really, really good. And I'm like, you know what? Canon, bravo. This is your first real foray, because I don't really consider the EOS RP and the EOS R good mirrorless cameras. The bodies kind of sucked. And the R5 practically had everything you wanted. And the R6 as well was a very respectable camera. I still think the R6 is a little bit too expensive for what it is, but that's just my personal opinion. I think it should be somewhere between $2,300 and $2,500. But maybe with discounts, we'll see that in the future. Anyway, we're not talking about that camera right now. So the EOS R5 was living up to the hype for a good 3 days. And then all of the bad stuff started coming out, and how it was crippled, how the overheating was doing this, the dynamic range was limited, how you couldn't restart the camera once it hit that overheating timer. And then it was all this fiasco about what was actually causing the overheating. Was it actually a temperature thing? Was it a timer thing and people were hacking it and doing what they wanted? And it's just like, this is really complicated. And for me, the end thing was, can I rely on this camera? And no, I couldn't rely on the EOS R5 for professional video work. I'm sure it's a great photo camera, and I haven't tested it yet, but I would love to one day. But based off of what everyone was saying, especially these documentary workers who were going out and filming all this stuff and then just having their cameras die on them, it did not inspire confidence. And like, even though these technically on paper are great cameras, do they get the job done? Can I rely on this camera to get the job done? The end answer to that was no, I can't rely on it. And I would not be willing to spend almost $4,000 to get it to that point. And then you also have to factor in the card. Like the new CF Express cards are not cheap. Like I think the 500 gig card is like $600 or something like that. And you're getting what, like 4 minutes of 4K with that? Like something really, or 8K, sorry, 8K. And it's just like, if I'm paying that much money for that much space on that fast of a card, I want to be able to use it to its fullest extent, and I feel like it's limited in many ways. So I was swayed away from the EOS R5, and I was like, all right, the Sony A7S III, all the rumors look like it's going to be the one. It's not going to push the envelope beyond compare. It's not doing the most like Canon is doing on the EOS R5. It looks like they're playing it safe, which is rare for Sony. And they're just going to make a really reliable, awesome camera. And honestly, I never saw myself shooting in 8K anyway. I would have liked to see 6K in a camera, which is another reason why I was intrigued in the red Komodo. But, you know, 4K is what I was planning on working in. I wasn't planning on shooting anything above 6K, especially depending on the data rates and whatnot. I like to have a little bit of room to play with, but yes, I was never going to see myself shooting 8K in this day and age with these cards, with the hardware that we currently have to edit. So 4K, an awesome, reliable 4K machine, is what we wanted. That's exactly what we wanted. Another thing that really drew me to the Sony A7S III was the fact that it had no record limit. And this is something Sony has been doing on a lot of their more recent cameras, like the 64, 65, 6600, I believe, and the A7R4. I don't know if maybe the A9 II, I'm not 100% sure on that one, but they've been implementing this on a lot of their new cameras. And to have a video camera with no record limit is awesome. You can use it for podcasts or long form interviews. And that for me was really nice. Like, even if I'm doing a YouTube video take and I keep messing up, I don't want to have to be stressing in the back of my mind. It's like, oh, that 30-minute timer is counting down. I need to stop recording and then record again. And then you just have multiple clips. It's just, you can have all one clip and then just edit out all the mistakes in that one clip, and that makes my life easier. So after doing all my research and weighing the pros and cons, I looked at the A7S III as a purely video camera, as a separate entity from my R3, as a purely video camera, and I wasn't even considering the fact that, yes, I could use my lenses on it. Was this worth my hard-earned money? And I'm looking at these specs here, and I'm like, all right, there seem to be no limitations. The 4K 1.1 times crop in 120 seems very reasonable because, you know, that changes what, a 20 mil to a 21.3 mil or something like that. So not a huge difference that's completely changing the focal length. It's still shooting 4K, so it's not some weird downsampled 2K or something like that. So I was like, all right, these limitations sound very doable, and I'm sure there's a reason for that, and especially the active mode stabilization, 1.1 times crop. I'm like, you know, I'm willing to give up a 1.1 times crop for even more stabilization. So that was, I was like, all right, I see what they're doing. They have the limited diameter of their lens mount when they first made it, which a lot of people say was only made for APS-C, and they kind of just shoved a full frame sensor in there. So I think now they're finding some limitations with that diameter of the lens mount, but with that 1.1 times crop, that IBIS is looking really, really nice. I'm like, okay, very doable, improved color science, which I really like. 4K, 422, 10-bit. This was a huge one for a lot of people, I know it was. And I was like, all right, this is sounding like a much more professional video camera. It's giving us the features we wanted, and it had the brand new like AF tracking system from the A9 and A7R IV, except even improved even more. So what you're seeing me now is eye tracking. Like I can just set this down, hit record, and it's tracking either one of my eyes. And I think that's such a cool feature, and that's something that no other company is really doing. I don't think that Canon is doing eye autofocus in video mode right now. I know they've started implementing it in photo mode, which is great. I still don't think it's as good as Sony's. I think it's getting close to that, but I don't think it's in video yet. Not 100% sure. Don't quote me on that. But I think Sony is the best autofocusing system on the market right now. And sure, you're going to hear a lot of other people say, oh, Canon is better, Nikon. I don't think Nikon is better. Let's be real. But then you might hear some other people say Canon is better in autofocus. And I disagree with that. But to each their own. This does exactly what I want it to do. And I think that the autofocus system on the A7S III is the best on the market. And then in addition to all that, you get the amazing low light performance, which I was very excited about. And now because you've unlocked that 422 10-bit, you can actually use the log profiles and not have them be ripped to shreds when you do any kind of grading on them, because it couldn't handle it previously with the 8-bit codecs that were on the previous gen cameras. And I noticed that when I was grading log footage from my R3, and I was like, this is not usable. There's no point in doing this because it doesn't have the bit depth to actually handle any sort of work like that. So this one does. So you've fully unlocked that amazing, incredible 15 stops of dynamic range based off of other people's tests. It's 13 usable stops, but that's still very impressive of how much dynamic range you can get in video in that kind of image, and the picture still looks really, really good. And then the low light, I'm not shooting completely in the dark all the time. I think a lot of Sony shooters get that rep where they just like, oh, I'm going to take pictures of fireflies, because why not? Because it's pitch black outside and my camera has the best low light. I'm not that kind of shooter, but now that I am in Hong Kong, I find myself doing a lot more night shooting. And it's very helpful for that because there's like no noise in my video, pitch black at night, which is awesome. And the fact, even though I'm excited about the low light performance of this camera, it's not necessarily the low light performance that does it for me. That low light performance translates to being able to light situations where there aren't ideal lighting, right? So like if you're in a horrible lighting condition, you can get by with a lot less than a different camera, which is really impressive. Like you can get a usable shot with like a phone flashlight or a small aperture MC like the one I have behind me, versus having to set up a whole studio light. Whereas with other cameras, you would either not be able to get the shot or really need to set up some lighting in order to get that shot that you needed. So for me, it's just a more versatile camera because it works in more situations and more difficult situations compared to other cameras on the market, and I really enjoy that. But also something for me is the form factor. You know, I travel a lot and I like having the ability to just throw something in my bag and go off and not have to worry about people yelling at me because I'm shooting in a place I'm not supposed to be shooting or something like that. And that's something you can't really get away with the cinema cameras, right? If like I was shooting in a place that is touristy and I had the full rig out, someone would probably come up to me. But with this one, no one's going to come up to me. I blend in with the other tourists, which is really nice. And because of its small form factor, it works with my Ronin SC. It's a very small gimbal, and I was worried because the body is actually larger on this camera than my R3 that it wouldn't work, and I was a little bit scared about that. But because of the flip out screen, the weight distribution actually makes it better for balancing than my R3, which I'm really excited about. So it still works on my very small and light gimbal, and I can take that anywhere practically. I just throw it in my bag. So again, that small form factor really plays into my world traveler need to get the shot and just throw something in my bag real quick. That just like go and shoot is really nice, having it all this really powerful thing in a small package. Another really nice thing on the Sony A7S III was the flip out touchscreen, and this is finally a first for Sony. We've been waiting so long for this. It's been on Canon cameras forever, and I'm just like, this is a no-brainer. They should have put this on their cameras so long ago. So now that we have a usable, flippable touchscreen, it's really nice to have that, especially when you're out and about and you're on a gimbal, you don't need to have an external monitor. You can just flip that out. Yes, it's nice to have an external monitor when you're doing pro work like that, but when you're running and gunning, it's nice just to have that flip out screen that's not built into the camera, that you can actually move and rotate and do what you need to do. So that was really, really nice, and that helped push the video camera functionality for me, that it was finally a usable, flippable touchscreen, and I really like that. I think I'll leave the rest of my nerding out to the full review of this camera, but that's why I decided to choose the Sony A7S III over the other cameras on the market, because it fit what I needed to do. It was a good form factor. It was a really good bang for the buck, coming in at $3,500, and the feature set, while not pushing the envelope beyond compare, was very, very strong and very reliable. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for in a video camera. And I'm sure that the industry is going to continue to change. Canon already announced the C7, which looks like a very interesting camera, and I'm excited about it, but I would still pick the Sony A7S III over that for many reasons, but it's full frame. And that's something that the Red Komodo just can't compete with. It's a Super 35 sensor, and yes, it has all its pros of being a cinema grade camera with 15, 16 stops dynamic range and a global shutter. We were all hoping for a global shutter on the A7S III. We didn't get one, but we did get faster readouts, which is nice, but I'd like to see a global shutter on the A7S IV, so that'd be great to see. But yeah, I think the Sony A7S III is just the most complete full frame package, and it's practically the power of an entry-level cinema camera in a mirrorless body, and it's really great to see. Now, since the A7S III came out, Sony announced the FX6, and rumor says it's going to be full frame, and I think that looks like a really, really good camera, and I'm very intrigued by that, and I think that competes more alongside the Red Komodo than the FX9 for me, and I'm going to be very intrigued to see what that camera entails and what it actually has in it, and that might be a purchase for down the line compared to the other cinema cameras. But I would still pick up the Sony A7S III over that camera for the work I'm doing right now and the form factor. So that's why I chose to buy the Sony A7S III. I hope you found it enlightening, informative, hopefully not too biased. And yeah, let me know in the comment section down below. Did you guys enjoy this video? Do you like hearing me rant about things that I enjoy nerding out about? My name is Marc Steiner, and I'll see you next time.